To the ladies, to the gentlemen, to all the fellas out there right now. Hope you're having a beautiful day, a fantastic day. Welcome back to the channel and the podcast. Today, I'm going to be identifying a guy who's a little bit busty. A bust at each position, running back, receiver, quarterback, and tight end. Maybe in that order. We'll see how we go through this. One player that I'm probably never going to get to. And now some of these players, the definition of a bust is they fall flat on their face, right? And it's easy to go to the bottom of the rankings and be like, this crappy player is just going to suck, right? But I'm trying to hit for the guys who at least have a decent amount of ADP. So basing it on the average draft position, say this guy's going 10th overall at his position, and I have him 15th or 16th or 18th, right? It just means that I'm never going to draft that player. So to me, based on their average draft position, it's a wide enough gap for me to say that there's a bust potential there. But then there's also cases where sometimes like guys are just a mid-round running back that I think are worth a mid-round running back pick at that point. Like it's just like, it's fine, but they also just don't have the upside that some people think that they do. So based on their upside around other guys around them, their average draft position might be fine, but you're drafting them for like 8 points a week, 9 points a week. Their upside's not there. There's guys later in the draft or there's guys right around those rounds that have higher upside. To me, that's a bust. To me, you're getting like at most a floor upside every single week out of them, an average upside with nothing else around that, when normally we know that there's some higher upside players in those middle to late rounds. So welcome if you're brand new here. As always, hit that like button for me. Big old subscribe button pops up on the screen. I'm going to edit that bad boy in there for you. So be sure to tap that in the bottom right hand corner. And another big thing that I'd like to ask, just word of mouth marketing. Tell a friend to tell a friend. If you like this content, share a link into a group message. Tell one friend about it, right? If you're talking at the work cooler at work, let them know. There is nothing more powerful than word of mouth marketing. So if you think that this is good content, whether this is your 20th time watching me, your second or your first time watching me, how you doing? It's nice to meet you if it's the first time. Just word of mouth marketing. Anytime anybody ever asks you about fantasy, even if it's your league mates. I know you want to keep some things a secret if you think this is good information, but I appreciate it. It helps me as an independent content creator all by myself here, one man small business, if you will. It really does help me grow and take on that next level of content if people are just talking about it amongst the social media ranks or even off of social media in day-to-day work lives or whatever it might be. So I appreciate you all in advance. We're going to be using partially today my Supreme Draft Guide for some of these players that we'll be talking about. That's where this landing page is behind me. So I have a lot of profiles on there, about 150. I'm going to be adding more profiles on there as well amongst these different ranks, rookies, running backs, receivers, tight ends, and then some premium content podcast is coming as well. So in the Supreme Draft Guide, it's got all these things. We're going to be using some today, rankings, key stats, all that stuff. Thanks to Monkey Knife Fight, the logo above if you're watching on YouTube, the beautiful logo that they have. They're making it $10 Rooskies. It's normally $29.99, $10 thanks to Monkey Knife Fight. They're going to sponsor the guide. So if you're interested, hit the link down below in the description. You get a bunch of stuff, all right? Ready? You're going to get a bunch of information that I have parsed very deep, probably too deep into to help you out with your league. So it's a $10 investment to help you win however much money your league has up for stakes or multiple leagues, or even if it's just bragging rights, pretty good. You're going to be the most informed fella in your group or lady fella. So appreciate y'all so much. Like and subscribe before we get into it and check out the Supreme Draft Guide. Let's start it off with my first bust. We'll start with a running back for all of you. And his name is Raheem Mostert. I want nothing to do with Raheem Mostert. Now, his ADP's been bouncing around a little bit. As I record this, I'm probably going to schedule this out for like 10 days from now. So maybe the ADP changed a little bit, but he's demanding the trade, right? He wanted some money. He wasn't asking for a lot of money, just to be paid what Tevin Coleman was being paid. And that's fair. It's not a ton of money, especially for the production that he showed in just 6 weeks last year, which is going to be another point of mine. Not a lot of production overall in the grand scheme of his life, where he's 28 and a half years old, which usually the fall off point for running backs starts around that ages 26 to 28, depending on your durability to that point. So he's already on the other side of the cliff a little bit. So it's fine to give him the extra couple million or $1 million, whatever he ended up getting for his deal if you are the 49ers. Just make everybody happy in that backfield. But in my opinion, drafting this guy as a top 25 running back is not on the cards for me. Now, his ADP, he was around like a top 25 running back, right around 25, 26. He dropped to right around 31. I'm seeing it at 29 right now. So it's a situation where, yeah, I think it's probably going to come back down to like 27 or 28. I currently have Raheem Mostert right around running back 30. So I kind of am where the ADP is on this, but I am tempted to move him down, put guys like DeAndre Swift ahead of him. But then you start to get into all the handcuff ranges of Jordan Howard, Phillip Lindsay, Tariq Cohen. I view Raheem Mostert as a handcuff. I think that Tevin Coleman's going to have a role in this offense. Jerick McKinnon is getting hyped up right now. I think he's going to have a role in this offense finally, especially if he is cleared to play, which they're saying that he is, and he is finally healthy. So I think that Raheem Mostert is currently be taken as like the highest handcuff, or even ahead of some workhorse potential backs like you're seeing, or guys who have higher PPR upside like James White, like a Damian Williams potentially. And now he's in a situation where people just think he's the automatic best handcuff out there, and they're viewing him as a workhorse running back. I don't really think that that's the case in my opinion. Now, due to a lot of injuries and his own efficiency in an offense that is going to scheme you to be very efficient, if you can get to the outside in a Kyle Shanahan offense, you're going to do well. He was very good last year. he was very, very efficient. Look at these numbers, right? We'll zoom in. He ended up seeing 137 carries, so it was somewhat of a smaller sample, similar to a guy like Devin Singletary being efficient on a smaller workload. But he ended up having, when you factor in his receiving yards, just under 1,000 total yards last year, 772 receiving yards, 10 total touchdowns. He was only seeing 10.1 touches per game, 11.5 touches per game in the second half of the year, where he started to get a little bit more work. Number one running back, though, in true yards per carry with 5.3. Number one breakaway run percentage because of the scheme around him. So he's just not being touched, right? It's pretty easy to pick up 5 or 4.5 yards per carry on every single clip when you're just not being touched all that much because of the running scheme you're in. Number 4 in yards per touch, which was good to see. And he had such a high touchdown percentage. He was up there with Aaron Jones. He was up there with guys like Mark Ingram, like a 6.6% touchdown percentage. These are just peak efficiency numbers that are going to have to drop, especially with McKinnon coming back, especially with Tevin Coleman coming back, and they're actually being competition. So although Matt Breida is not there anymore, which is a good plus, he's out of San Fran to Miami during the trade, during the draft, it's a situation where there's just so much efficiency, too much efficiency, even in this efficient running scheme, that Raheem Mostert, I don't see him being able to continue that kind of workload. I mean, his touches overall, you remember what he did against the Packers in the playoff. You remember what he did for a couple weeks down the stretch last year. Obviously, he starts to pop off, but he doesn't really see any type of a workload until week 13 against Baltimore, where he sees 21 touches. Then he sees 12, 15, 11, and 11, right? So he sees that one big workload of 21 touches against Baltimore, where he does play well. He finishes as the running back 5, but there is no extra big workload until he goes to the playoffs and they face the Packers, and he sees these 4 touchdowns and this huge game of 200 yards and yada, yada, yada. And that's the recency bias to an extent that we remember about him. We remember him a little bit in the Super Bowl, of course, because his team played there, but there was never a huge workload. Again, 11.5 touches per game. Why do people think Raheem Mostert was the guy? I get that he was mega efficient. I understand all of that. A lot of guys can be on smaller samples, especially when you're in this passing offense or this run blocking offense of Kyle Shanahan. But outside of his 21 touches against Baltimore, 16 touches was his most touches, and that was week 2. Outside of that, anything down the stretch, you're looking at 15, 12, like those are the types of touches he was getting, 11, so it kind of hovered around right exactly what this average says. He also benefited from playing in the second most run-heavy offense, where they ran 31.1 times per game. Joe Staley retired. I know they got Trent Williams, but anytime, and especially in a shortened offseason and a compromised preseason, Trent Williams is going to be a downgrade this year from Joe Staley, at least for the overall season. Williams can come in by week 4 or 5 and be up there and being just as good as Joe Staley was, but without that cohesiveness to start, it is going to be a little bit wobbly to start the year, in my opinion. Another year older for Richard Sherman on the defense. They lost some pieces on that defense, replacing them with rookies, but it's going to take some time, in my opinion. So you're in a situation where if the defense naturally regresses, which defenses always do, think about Jacksonville, think about the Bears in recent years, number 1 defenses, number 2 defenses, they drop around 5, 6, 7 spots on average. And now you're in a situation where maybe the offensive line gets a little bit more faulty. Jimmy G's going to have to throw more. And if Jimmy G is throwing more, it comes to a situation where now just the overall carries and them running the second most times per game behind Baltimore last year, if that drops to like running the 7th or 8th most or 10th most times per game, that's going to hurt all the running backs, including Raheem Mostert, who already had a small sample. So although there's a big old picture of Raheem right there, you go down now to what they did in the offseason. And yeah, they got Trent Williams. That's going to help, but they lost Joe Staley. So I think, like I said, it's a little bit of a net negative. And then you look at some other things here, and mainly Matt Breida leaving, but Jerick McKinnon coming back, Tevin Coleman still back there. You also have the injury concerns, hamstring, shoulder since 2017. He missed 8 games in 2018 with a fractured arm. He had a knee sprain last year for 5 weeks that he was dealing with. So there is some durability concerns, especially like if he was 24 years old, I'd say, okay, he got over those injuries, right? He got over them when he was 20, 21. He's 28 and a half years old. So his body is wearing down with every single touch that he gets. He's somewhat fresh because he's never seen these 300 touch seasons, but he's still 28 and a half years old. So when you have an injury history, it makes it even more worrisome. So the backfield competition is indeed going to be Tevin Coleman, Jerick McKinnon, Jeff Wilson. You could also throw JaMychal Hasty into that mix, or undrafted free agent. We'll see if they end up keeping him on the roster. Coleman last year played more snaps when he was healthy, 42%. Had right around the same amount of work, 137 carries, 544 yards. He just wasn't as efficient, but he had 7 touchdowns. And Coleman is in the final year of a 2-year contract. So you have a contract year for Coleman. I assume that you're going to see McKinnon being very motivated since he's finally going to be able to actually suit up and play. So for me, Raheem Mostert is not somebody that I'm drafting in any drafts. I don't think I have a single share of Raheem Mostert, and I never will unless he drops like 3 rounds from where he should. And I don't think that's going to be happening. Next on the list at the wide receiver position now, I give you Tyler Boyd. And I actually really like Tyler Boyd. Somebody that 2 years ago, when he started popping off, I was playing all the time in DFS, Daily Fantasy Sports. Last year, he was always somewhat cheap at times, and I was playing him as well because he was the number 1 receiver on this team. I mean, you just slide through the game logs. He starts off the season 14, 22, 12. There's a 28 burger in there in the first half of the season. Pretty consistent down the stretch. Week 12, 19 points, then 17, then 13, then 5, then 34. The wide receiver 1 in week 16. Then he finishes the season with 11 fantasy points. This was a good wide receiver last year, but he played as the number 1 wide receiver and he played out of the slot. And for a good amount of the season, guys just weren't keying in on him. John Ross, before he got injured the first couple weeks of the season, was getting attention. Auden Tate was getting attention of the number 1 cornerbacks. The one team that actually ended up putting some top-end cornerbacks on him, they moved Marlon Humphrey to the slot in week 10. Baltimore played him, held him to just 12 fantasy points. Also in week 6, he played him and only scored 4 fantasy points, his worst performance against a very good slot cornerback, of course. So that was the only time he really saw a top cornerback. New England actually did make Stephon Gilmore follow Tyler Boyd a good amount. He only scores 5 fantasy points that week. So Boyd is not this guy who's going to get separation against top cornerbacks. That's just not his deal. He plays out of the slot where it's normally worse cornerbacks, and he just takes advantage of that. And he was able to when teams just didn't scheme properly and put their top cornerback on him in the slot, because most shadow cornerbacks or most top cornerbacks don't feel comfortable in the slot. They feel vulnerable because they don't have the sideline to help them out. And it's an extra defender when you have the sideline. They can't go towards the left if they're on the left side of the field because they'll run out of bounds. Whereas if you're in the slot, you can use the entire field. So you have to have a wider skill set. And that's why most slot cornerbacks kind of suck, to be honest with you. That's why Chris Harris was a slot cornerback. And he said, hey, I'm good here. Let's just move to the outside to make my life a lot easier, right? Chris Harris Jr., Denver Broncos. So with that being said, you have Tyler Boyd here, and I don't hate him, but he's going off the board as like wide receiver 30, wide receiver 31, 32, depending on where you look. He's my wide receiver 40, so I'm not saying he's a complete worst player possible to draft, but based on where he's going, yeah, I don't think he's going to be a top 30 wide receiver. Couple things, right? So we can look at what he did last year. I kind of talked about the game logs quickly, but he was the number 1 receiver on this team. Keep that in mind, right? They ended up going out right now. We'll look at the additions and stuff, but they added T. Higgins in the second round, a rookie, out of Clemson, and they didn't have AJ Green for a single snap last season. So the starting wide receivers were very much so Tyler Boyd, John Ross, Auden Tate, and that's kind of what they rolled out there for most of the season. Alex Erickson and some other weapons as well. Weapons, I say, quotes around that. But you end up having 92% of the snaps. He catches 90 balls. He sees over 1,000 yards and he scores 5 touchdowns. Big thing, 147 targets, 25% share. So he was 7th in targets in the NFL, 8th in receptions. He really was getting a lot of usage, especially when Ryan Finley was there for the month, potentially the worst quarterback in the league last year. Finley was very, very bad. Dalton did throw the ball 40 times a game, though, because the defense was just riddled with injuries on the defensive line and mainly in the secondary. So they had to throw to play keep up. But you did see that Tyler Boyd, although he had bad quarterback play, was able to do some things on his own. He was 10th in yards after the catch with 22.7 yards after the catch per game. That's good to see. He finishes a wide receiver 17 last year. Again, the number 1 receiver on this team. But quickly coming into this year, the target competition is going to be a little bit more difficult. So now AJ Green is back. And who knows? I think AJ Green maybe has 1 year left in the tank, especially since he hasn't had to play for a year and a half. So maybe he has 1.5 years before he falls off of that 32-year-old cliff most wide receivers usually do. But AJ Green is there, right? John Ross is going to be fully healthy. He's there. They drafted T. Higgins in the second round. I don't think he'll be an immediate impact, but maybe down the second half of the season, he's there. Auden Tate was maybe one of the best jump ball and contested catch players in the NFL last year. He's there. So Tyler Boyd quickly becomes the number 2 receiver in this offense, but maybe the number 3 weapon, depending on what AJ Green has in the tank and behind the running game in Joe Mixon, in my opinion. So he's not going to see these 147 targets. He's just not going to. So he's not being drafted as a number 17 overall receiver where he finished last year. But if he has 147 targets last year and he finishes top 20, right? Barely top 20. Let's say he goes to 110 targets this year. 37 targets are lost now. And let's say he falls now down to somewhere around like the 37th wide receiver overall because of that, right? You're getting AJ Green, who's a bigger red zone threat. You're getting Auden Tate, who's a bigger red zone threat. T. Higgins is likely going to be a bigger red zone threat. So now if you're looking at him having a 4 or 5 touchdown season, somewhere around like the 850, 950 yard mark, but not 90 receptions. Now it's like 75 receptions. This is dropping him into the mid 30s to the late 30s, right around where I have him ranked as wide receiver 40. I can't be taking him at like wide receiver 30. You're taking him at the best case scenario that AJ Green is still bad, that the offensive line is bad enough that Joe Mixon doesn't end up getting his, that T. Higgins doesn't get enough credit on the field this year, and that John Ross doesn't take another step forward like he did last year. And then Auden Tate just saying that he doesn't play as much. I can't be betting on all those, and I guess all of those don't actually have to happen. You can see some of the stats right here from some of his teammates. Auden Tate was seeing about 50 yards per game, 3.5 receptions per game last year. Again, no AJ Green, so a lot of these are all going to be skewed for everybody. But John Ross broke out last year. He missed a bunch of games, half the season, but 63 yards per game, 7 targets per game was his average. So good to see John Ross on the outside, especially early in the year. He's like the number 1 receiver 2 or 3 weeks into the season because of a couple of big touchdowns in week 1, I think, against Seattle. And then this is what they did in the offseason. So you can see in the draft, Joe Burrow, T. Higgins. Obviously, Burrow is going to be a really big upgrade from Ryan Finley and probably Andy Dalton. I think Andy Dalton always was underrated, but probably Andy Dalton. Nothing in free agency. Offensive line, Jonah Williams will be back, but it still shouldn't be that great. But naturally, hopefully, you would expect it to get a little bit better, especially if Joe Burrow can be a good quarterback and not hold on to the ball, maybe be a little bit mobile. So yeah, for me, Tyler Boyd is just a little bit overpriced at this point at the 31. So I think he's going to be a bust because there's a lot of wide receivers that are currently going at spots spots that I like, but for him, he's one that stands out about 10 spots off of where I have him ranked. Next up for me is Aaron Rodgers, and this hits close to home. I mean, I got stuff, memorabilia behind me of the Packers. You can't see it, but I'm a Packers fan. The more I cover fantasy sports and sports in general, I start to become less and less team-oriented, but Aaron Rodgers, he's currently going as quarterback 10. I have him as like quarterback 16. I don't have anything against Aaron Rodgers. It's just a lot of quarterbacks that there's not that big of a gap. There's only 32 that you can rank as starters. So when there's a gap of 6 that highly, it's going to stand out. Most of my top 15 are within like 1 or 3 spots of consensus. Aaron Rodgers, those 6 spots ahead of where I currently have him ranked, maybe 5 spots in some of my rankings. But this is a guy who was 8th in attempts last year, right? But that's going to drop. They only threw the 15th most times per game last year. They ran the ball a lot. Aaron Jones was hurt at points. Jamal Williams, they obviously drafted A.J. Dillon. So some of these things are going to end up hurting Aaron Rodgers for what looks like to be an offense that just wants to continuously run the ball. I mean, they drafted 3 linemen in the 6th round. They drafted a fullback. They drafted who was a kind of a tight end. They ended up drafting a running back in the 2nd round and a backup quarterback in the 1st. Nothing to help the offense in the passing game this specific year, all to help the running game and the future offense potentially at the quarterback position. But you've seen the accuracy drop from Aaron Rodgers a little bit, so that's always going to be a concern. But if you see the volume drop, that's worse. So if the accuracy drops, you see the efficiency dropping, right? He was 27th in play action passing. Now maybe that increases if they run the ball a little bit more. He was 21st in clean pocket completion percentage. That's not good. He was 25th when pressured, and the offensive line should still be good, although Brian Bulaga is now gone to the Chargers. Some depth pieces are also gone. And then he was 12th with a true passer rating. So his completion percentage drops to 17th. That's not good. Like, it's around average, but you're drafting him as an above average player. His overall efficiency dropped off last year. And look, he was still clutch. He got it done when he needed to, especially in the playoffs. But if we're talking about you for a 16-game season as your quarterback 1 at that spot, it can't be a quarterback 1 for me. Not a top 10 guy, in my opinion. No way. He's my quarterback 16, like I said. So the efficiency drops off. But the volume was still there, right? 8th most attempts per game. That pans out. But now I think the volume is going to drop a little bit. Aaron Jones. They're building this Tennessee offense where you ended up seeing head coach Matt LaFleur come from when he was with Deion Lewis and the big one, the big dog, Derrick Henry out there. So now you have Aaron Jones, Jamal Williams. Maybe he's even a cut candidate, Jamal Williams. I hope not, because I think he's a very good player for that team. And you see A.J. Dillon back here. All they did was improve the defense a little bit, and then the offensive line for really what's going to be happening is probably more running here. So Aaron Rodgers is about to turn 37 years old. He's going to come out here now and a guy who was number 2 in deep ball attempts, number 4 in red zone attempts, number 8 overall in attempts, like I said. A lot of things looked nice last year. He was 11th in passing yards. He had 26 touchdowns. That was 8th. He was very good when it came to just your fantasy upside last year. You also get to throw in his 46 carries for 183 yards on the ground, 1 rushing touchdown. So there are good things here. He finished as the quarterback 13 in fantasy points per game last year, right? But I think things are coming off of a cliff here. I think the efficiency probably stays where it was last year. Maybe slightly improves, more likely slightly decreases, and then also you're going to see the volume decrease. So 13th overall in fantasy points per game last year. If the volume decreases this year at all, say he goes from throwing the 8th most times per game, and the fact that his team overall was only 15th in passing plays per game tells you that he's probably naturally due for a little bit of regression. If it goes from 8th overall in pass attempts to like 16th, this guy's going to be like the quarterback 18 this year. So for me, I'm going to personally stay away from it. I like the weapons that he's attached to in terms of Devontae Adams up top, in terms of Allen Lazard as a potential value and Devin Funchess, just because I don't love them, but they're just good value. You're spending like a 15th round pick, in Devin Funchess' case, like your last round pick on him, right? If you're in like a 20-man league, or a 20 draft league. So even then, I still think it's a little bit too high of a price at quarterback 10. Got like 6 guys ahead of him. Aaron Rodgers, sad to say this, but I guess he's going to be the quarterback bust by default this year for me. And then let's close the door with a tight end who, man, he's my tight end 18. He's going as like tight end 10. Y'all got to stop with Jared Cook. Again, Packer fan. Jared Cook's catch with Aaron Rodgers against the Cowboys. Loved it. Jared Cook, I think, is a good player, but he's not going to be a top 10 tight end this year. He's going to be a borderline top 20 tight end, in my opinion. Not only is there a ton of young, exciting tight ends that are more athletic than Jared Cook, are like 10 years younger. He's 33 and a half years old than Jared Cook, and just have better upside in their higher in priority and their target share pecking order. Like Jared Cook is now the 4th best passing option, and you could argue with me maybe the 5th best, right? They had Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara. That's number 1 and number 2. They brought in Emmanuel Sanders, which is going to be huge knocking against Jared Cook. He's number 3, and then maybe Jared Cook's number 4. So now you lose a spot in the pecking order. You go from the 3rd target in your pecking order, where Traquan Smith couldn't get anything done last year. Ted Ginn never was really a weapon for the Saints in dealing with injuries. So now the 4th option in your passing game, you only had 65 targets last year, right? Like, don't get me wrong. I know that he missed 2 games. So you're only going to have, let's just say, 70, 72 targets last year as the 3rd option. As the 4th option with Emmanuel Sanders coming in, going to command a decent target share, I'd assume. Maybe Jared Cook sees 60 targets this year if he plays all 16 games. Maybe it's like 55. How do I like that as a top 10 tight end? Not at all. And then you factor in that he was way too efficient last year. He had a 20.9% touchdown rate. He scored 9 touchdowns on 65 targets. You think that's going to happen again? No. Even if he sees these 65 targets again, he's probably going to see 4 or 5 touchdowns. So that drops him automatically from his last year finish as like a top 10 tight end to dropping him outside the top 15 right there. I don't even have to make a case anymore. I know he was 9th in fantasy points per game, but it took a 20.9% touchdown rate. Those 9 touchdowns were second amongst all tight ends last year. Not going to happen again. No shot at all. And here's the efficiency metrics. Ready? Yards per reception, number 1 amongst tight ends. Yards per target, number 1 amongst tight ends. Yards per route run, number 7. You want to know why? He had deep touchdowns down the seam. That was kind of his game plan last year. Down the middle of the field, he was scoring deep touchdowns. Number 1, you're going to have Drew Brees being a year older. Number 2, completing those at the rate of 20.9% is not that sticky of a stat. And now number 3, Emmanuel Sanders is probably a more productive player and younger. Like, you can't say that about many players. Emmanuel Sanders is actually younger than Jared Cook. I know they're different positions, but Emmanuel Sanders himself, like 32, 33, an older player, but he's actually younger than Jared Cook. Down the middle of the field is probably going to be more of a weapon. So efficiency in general is going to drop Jared Cook from being a top 10 tight end last year to outside the top 15 alone. Then you factor in Emmanuel Sanders' addition, an extra year of age for a guy in Drew Brees, who they are kind of a run-first offense anyways. And then you also factor in all these young and exciting tight ends who are coming into their 3rd, 4th year in the league. Some of them their 2nd year, like Noah Fant and also TJ Hawkinson. They're just going to be better options for upside, in my opinion, in that tight end 12, tight end 10 to tight end 20 range. So Cook's a tight end 18, and he actually has a chance to fall down my rankings. One final stat for you, 2.58 fantasy points per target. If anybody ever uses that as a way to say, this guy Jared Cook is so good, completely turn off their content. They're a fraud. They're a fantasy football a fraud, if you want to let me tell you that. Send them my information. We can talk about it. Because right now, you saying, oh, he had 2.58 fantasy points per target, and saying that's a good thing for him without citing the fact that it was heavily swayed by having a 20.9% target share, which is not repeatable, especially not for Jared Cook. If you told me it was Rob Gronkowski in his prime or Jimmy Graham in his prime, I might say that might be repeatable for one more year. Not Jared Cook going out the year in his final couple of years in the league. So not for me. Jared Cook is a bust, a bust, a bust. So I appreciate y'all tuning into this video. Please do take a second of your time right now if you enjoyed it, lady fellas and fellas. Hit that like button for me. Big old subscribe button's popping up. 1 second. Bottom right hand corner. Just tap that subscribe button. Really does help. Each one of you that subscribe within the video or like button within the video, or even better, notification bell within the video, all 3 of those is great. It shows it to like 10 or 20 more people per person. So the more people that do that, the more people that get to see my video potentially. If they do it, the more people, right? So we get to grow organically. I really do appreciate that. And then also just tell a friend to tell a friend. Shoot this link into a group message. Post it on your Twitter. You can tag me and I'll like it. I'll retweet it. I'll say thank you because I really do appreciate all of the support that you guys give to me. August is the month that we are in. It is the biggest month for fantasy football traction. So if you guys want to help out on your end for this free content, it allows me to make potentially even more free content because more people engage, then I can maybe hire like an editor and we reach even more people. So it's all a win-win-win. Go get the Supreme Draft Guide. $10 Rooskies. Thank you, Monkey Knife Fight. Check out their site as well. As always, love Monkey Knife Fight. Those people are beautiful people over there. And they're saving your pocketbook 66 to 67% off of this draft guide. Goes from $29.99 to $10 Rooskies. So thank you so much. Check it out. Link down below. A bunch of stuff to give you more information to put you in a better position to win your fantasy league or leagues, especially if you have multiple. This is a no-brainer option in my opinion. Put a lot of work into it. I think you're going to like it. Only have positive feedback so far. You can check it out. Everything that's included will be on the link down below. Key stats, rankings, tiers, all these things. Team changes, player profiles, premium content. I can go on and on and on. Getting out of breath over here. So thanks again in advance. Like and subscribe before you go. I'll see you all in the next one. We're releasing 5 to 6 videos a week right now. Can't wait to see you in the next one, gang. Hopefully you're staying safe out there. Buckle up. Get ready. Football's coming soon. Peace out.